Cherie Hu is a music business journalist and researcher, and I asked her about the significance of Ultra China's debut in Beijing and the growth of electronic dance music in China.
I think it is a really big deal, especially given that Ultra is one of the biggest franchises in the U.S., first of all, and in terms of the international state of the roster, a lot of the biggest acts across the U.S. and Europe, they're going to be performing in Beijing, and it's really breaking new ground in terms of introducing this new music to these listeners. Of course, it's launching in Beijing because the audience is already there, and there is a proven market in China for this music in a way that I think we've never seen before, at least from the U.S.
So who is going to Ultra? Who's listening, and why? What is the demographic, if you can describe the listener for us?
I would guess it's a lot of international expats or international people working or studying in China. That's definitely a big component of it. But also, I would say a lot of just the younger generation in general, especially because there are a lot of electronic artists now developing relationships with the main streaming services in China, be that all the streaming services under Tencent like QQ Music, or also developing an audience on Youku and all those other video platforms. I know there's a lot more momentum around that, especially for Asian artists in the US, like American-born Asian artists like ZHU is a perfect example of someone who was born in the States but is really working the market in China, and he's done a lot of tours in Shanghai and Beijing and also a lot of the other big cities.
So we have the big cities, but how would you describe China's club scene? Are there certain cities other than Beijing or Shanghai where you see a bigger scene than others?
Yes, that's a good question. I think Guangzhou and Shenzhen are, they also have their own up-and-coming scenes. And I think education does have a big part in how big that scene is. I know Shenzhen has a lot of really great music schools across all different types of genres, and so that gives the opportunity for younger people to travel to those cities and then start to build a scene there from the ground up.
You mentioned the market. How does the electronic music industry, the DJs, the performers, view the Chinese market?
Historically, and also right now, the Chinese music industry has a lot of issues around piracy. So thinking from a label perspective in the US or in Europe, they tend to think first and foremost about revenue. And so they would look at China and say, oh, there's no way that we can make money from there because no one is buying our music. But I think there's been a transformation in terms of what people are prioritizing, thinking about how Tencent has like hundreds of millions, if not billions of users now across all of their platforms, and in terms of engagement and daily engagement, it definitely rivals some of the other platforms that people tend to think about mostly in the West, such as Spotify or Apple Music. And so I think people are realizing the value of that audience and then going where that audience is instead of just the money alone.